Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
What do you think of me? The question emerged softer than she'd intended, carrying a vulnerability that surprised even her. It hung in the space between them, simple yet loaded with implication and potential. Daniel turned his head to look at her, genuine surprise flashing across his features. In the lamplight, his eyes appeared darker, more intense, the usual vivid blue deepening to something closer to indigo. What? Kristin exhaled, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly. This wasn't the time for games, or deflection, or the witty banter they both excelled at. This moment called for something rarer. Honesty. Directness. A willingness to be seen. I mean, what do you really think of me? She elaborated, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. Not as a client or a business associate, or even as your fantasy football rival. Just me. Daniel was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful as he studied her face. The pause wasn't uncomfortable or awkward, rather, it conveyed consideration, as if he was genuinely reflecting on her question rather than reaching for a glib response. But then he shifted, turning his body toward her completely, one arm resting along the back of the bench behind her. The position created a sense of intimacy, a shared space that excluded the rest of the world, focusing entirely on their exchange. And when he spoke, his voice was low, deep, and utterly sincere. "I think you're incredible," he said, his eyes locked onto hers, unwavering and intense. The simple declaration, delivered without hesitation or qualification, hit Kristin with unexpected force. There was no flirtation in his tone, no strategic charm or practiced smoothness, just raw honesty that seemed to bypass all her defenses. Kristin swallowed, her breath catching slightly. She had expected perhaps a playful response, maybe even something suggestive or flirtatious. Not this direct, unvarnished sincerity that made it impossible to maintain her usual light defense of humor and deflection. Daniel continued, his voice steady, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're smart. Not just intelligent, sharp. You see things differently, and you don't just follow the crowd. You have this ability to cut through all the noise and get straight to what matters." He leaned slightly closer, his expression animated as he continued. "The way you handled the Morgan project, completely reinventing their concept when everyone else was just copying competitors. That was brilliant." His admiration seemed so genuine, so specific, that Kristin felt herself flushing with pleasure, despite her usual resistance to flattery. "You're ambitious, driven, and you don't let anyone walk all over you," he added, a hint of admiration coloring his tone. "I've seen you in meetings with men twice your age who try to talk over you. And you just," he made a subtle gesture with his hand. "You command respect without demanding it. That's rare." Kristin's heart thudded against her ribs, the rhythm accelerating with each word. This wasn't just surface appreciation or casual compliments. He had been watching her, noticing details, forming impressions based on substance rather than appearance. "You're also unbelievably infuriating," he added with a smirk that softened the words into something affectionate rather than critical. "Because you challenge me. Constantly. And I love every second of it." Kristin let out a soft laugh, the tension in her chest easing slightly with the return to their more familiar dynamic of playful antagonism. "Someone has to keep that ego in check," she replied, the response automatic but warmed with genuine affection. But he wasn't done. "And then, there's the obvious." His gaze darkened slightly, traveling slowly over her features before returning to meet her eyes, his voice dropping lower, resonating with an appreciation that was unmistakably physical. "You're stunning, Kristin. Not just beautiful, you're magnetic. You walk into a room, and people notice." Her breath hitched, caught somewhere between her lungs and her lips. The shift in his tone, in his focus, created an immediate response, heat spreading through her body, pooling low in her stomach, making her acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how easily the distance between them could be eliminated. "But the thing is," his voice softened, becoming almost intimate, meant only for her despite the emptiness of the park around them. One hand lifted, hesitating for a moment before gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her skin. "I don't care about any of that as much as I care about this. The way you make me feel when I'm around you. Like nothing else matters." The touch, brief and gentle as it was, sent electricity cascading through her system. His fingertips against her cheek, the warmth of his palm near her face. Such simple contact, yet loaded with significance that transcended the physical. "And how do I make you feel?" Kristin asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the question escaping before she could contain it. Daniel's expression shifted, growing more intense, more focused. "Alive," he replied simply. "More alive than I've felt in years." Kristin felt something snap inside her. A final thread of restraint, giving way beneath the weight of his words. His proximity, the charged atmosphere that had been building between them for weeks. Without thinking, without hesitating, she threw caution to the wind. And she moved. In one fluid motion, she closed the distance between them, her hand finding the back of his neck, fingers sliding into his hair as she pulled him toward her. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. The moment both endless and instantaneous, as she erased the space that had separated them for too long. Their lips met with a certainty that belied any nervousness she might have felt, the contact electric and inevitable. Daniel responded immediately, one arm wrapping around her waist to draw her closer, his other hand cradling her face with surprising gentleness, given the intensity of his response. The kiss was everything their banter had promised. Challenging, responsive, a perfect balance of giving and taking. No hesitation, no awkward adjustment, just the perfect synchronization of two people who had been moving toward this moment since their first meeting. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Daniel looked at her with an expression of wonder and hunger in equal measure. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment you walked into that conference room," he admitted, his voice rougher now, affected by the kiss in a way that sent another thrill through her system. "What took you so long?" Kristin challenged, her hands still resting against his chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart beneath her palms. Daniel's answering smile was equal parts charming and predatory. "I was waiting for you to make the first move. Seemed only fair, since you've been ahead in every other aspect of this relationship." "Relationship?" Kristin repeated, eyebrow arching even as her lips curved into a smile. "Is that what this is?" "That," Daniel replied, pulling her closer again, "is entirely up to you. But I know what I want." As his lips found hers again, more demanding this time, more certain, Kristin had to acknowledge, if only to herself, that she knew exactly what she wanted too. And for once, it had nothing to do with winning. In one smooth motion, she shifted, swinging her leg over his lap and straddling him. The move was bold, decisive, pure Kristin in its confidence, yet her heart hammered wildly in her chest as she settled her weight against him. The iron bench was cold beneath her knees, a stark contrast to the immediate heat that flared between their bodies. Daniel's hands immediately went to her hips, his grip firm and grounding, but his expression was pure shock. His blue eyes widened, darkening instantly with desire as he registered their new position. The street lamp cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jawline and the sudden tension in his features. "Kristin," His voice was rough, strained, caught somewhere between question and demand. She didn't let him finish. Instead, she grabbed his face between her palms, fingers sliding along his jaw, and kissed him. Hard. The connection was electric, a current of heat and want and months of suppressed desire surging between them. His stubble rasped against her palms, another reminder of how thoroughly masculine he was, how different this was from anything she'd experienced before. And Daniel. He didn't hesitate for a single second before kissing her back. Any surprise melted instantly into passionate response, as if he'd been merely waiting for her to make this exact move. His hands tightened on her hips, fingers digging into the denim with an urgency that would likely leave marks. Marks she found herself wanting, proof that this wasn't just another dream or fantasy. He pulled her flush against him, and Kristin felt everything. The heat, the tension, the months of built-up desire finally exploding. The solid warmth of his chest against hers, the unmistakable evidence of his arousal beneath her, the way his breath caught when she instinctively shifted against him. Every sensation magnified, intensified, by how long they denied themselves this release. "God, Kristin," he murmured against her mouth, the words more breath than sound. "Do you have any idea how long I've wanted this?" Her fingers tangled in his hair as she deepened the kiss, the silky strands sliding between her fingers as she used her grip to angle his head exactly how she wanted it. Daniel groaned softly, the vibration rumbling through his chest and into hers, the sound igniting something primal and hungry within her. His hands roamed up her back, beneath the cropped leather jacket, spreading heat across her skin through the thin fabric of her tank top. He pulled her closer, 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 as if he could somehow eliminate the barriers between them through sheer force of will. "Not long enough," she gasped, in response to his question, breaking the kiss just long enough to drag oxygen into her lungs before diving back in. This wasn't just a kiss. This was a declaration, a culmination, a beginning. Every flirtatious comment, every lingering look, every accidental touch that had crackled between them for months, all of it had been building to this moment. The chemistry that had been apparent from their first meeting had finally ignited, and the resulting conflagration threatened to consume them both. And neither of them planned on stopping anytime soon. Daniel's mouth left hers to trace a scorching path along her jaw, down the column of her throat, finding a particularly sensitive spot that made her gasp and arch against him. His teeth grazed her skin, the slight edge of pain amplifying the pleasure in a way that sent sparks cascading through her nervous system. "You taste even better than I imagined," he murmured against her neck, his breath hot against her skin. "And believe me, I've imagined this extensively." Kristin managed, her cognitive functions temporarily short-circuited by the sensation of his mouth on her skin. "Care to share those imaginings in detail?" Daniel chuckled against her throat, the sound low and dangerous. "I'd rather demonstrate than narrate," he replied, his hands sliding down to cup her backside, pulling her more firmly against him in a way that left no doubt about his meaning. Kristin had no idea how long they had been kissing, only that she never wanted to stop. Time had become elastic, stretching and compressing according to some new physics that operated solely within the bubble they'd created. The park around them had faded to insignificance, the ambient city sounds reduced to white noise beneath the thundering of her heartbeat and their shared, increasingly ragged breathing. Straddling Daniel's lap, her body pressed flush against his, she felt the sheer heat radiating between them. Even through layers of clothing, his body burned against hers, a furnace of barely controlled desire that matched the inferno building within her. The cool night air did nothing to mitigate the rising temperature between them. His hands were everywhere, gripping her hips, sliding up her back, tangling in her hair, pressing her closer, as if he couldn't get enough of her. Each touch was both reverent and possessive, appreciative and demanding. A perfect balance of control and abandon that made her head spin. And God, she didn't want him to stop. The sensation of his hands on her body, his mouth against hers, the solid warmth of him beneath her, all of it combined into an intoxicating cocktail that left her dizzy with need. Every point of contact seemed to generate its own electrical field, currents of pleasure arcing between them with increasing intensity. Kristin ground herself against him, the friction sending a delicious shockwave through her body. The movement was instinctive, primal. Her body seeking more pressure, more contact, more of him. The layers of fabric between them were suddenly maddening, unwelcome barriers to what she truly wanted. I know. Daniel let out a low, guttural groan, his fingers tightening on her hips, guiding her movement. His head fell back slightly, exposing the strong column of his throat, his expression a study in exquisite torture. Christ, Kristin, he rasped, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. You're driving me insane. Hearing him react like that, because of her, sent a fresh wave of desire coursing through her veins. There was something profoundly satisfying, almost intoxicating, about having this effect on a man like Daniel Carter, seeing the composed, controlled businessman reduced to raw need by her touch. She did it again, rolling her hips slowly, deliberately, reveling in the way his breath hitched, in the way his grip on her became possessive, almost desperate. The power she felt in that moment was heady, addictive, knowing exactly how to elicit that response, watching his control fray at the edges with each calculated movement. Good, she whispered against his ear, her breath hot against his skin. Turnabout is fair play. You've been driving me crazy for months. Months, he echoed, his hands sliding up her sides, thumbs brushing the undersides of her breasts, through her thin top. Since the first meeting, you mean? Kristin arched into his touch, wanting more, needing more. Since the moment you walked in, looking entirely too good in that suit, she confirmed, her voice hitching as his thumbs made another, more deliberate pass. Kristin, he murmured against her lips, his voice rough, strained, like he was barely keeping himself in check. The way he said her name, part prayer, part demand, sent another shiver through her, heightening her awareness of every point where their bodies connected. His hands roamed over her body, sliding under the hem of her crop jacket, tracing along the bare skin of her waist. His palms were slightly calloused, creating a delicious friction against her smooth skin, not the soft hands of someone who only worked behind a desk, but those of a man who wasn't afraid of occasional physical labor, despite his executive status. She shivered, arching into his touch, her own fingers tangling deeper into his hair. The texture was silky between her fingers, another sensory detail to catalog in this overwhelming experience. She tugged slightly, using her grip to angle his head exactly where she wanted it, directing him with silent commands that he seemed all too willing to follow. Their kisses grew hotter, hungrier, all restraint slipping away like morning mist beneath a rising sun. What had begun as exploration had transformed into conquest, both of them seeking to claim, to possess, to mark. The careful distance they'd maintained for months had evaporated completely, replaced by an almost desperate need to make up for lost time. Kristin nipped at his lower lip, a playful bite that carried just enough pressure to send a clear message. I want more. The action elicited another deep, rumbling groan from him. And God, that sound was addictive. It resonated through his chest into hers, a vibration that seemed to attune their bodies to the same frequency. She wanted to hear more. She wanted to discover every sound he could make, wanted to catalog each response, wanted to learn exactly how to push him past the limits of his considerable control. She wanted more. Breathless, her lips hovered just above his, their shared air hot and charged between them. Her forehead rested against his, their gazes locked in a silent conversation, more eloquent than words could have been. His pupils were blown wide with desire, the blue of his irises reduced to a thin ring around bottomless black. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice low and dripping with pure need, "take me somewhere. Now. Now." The three words hung between them, unambiguous in their meaning, direct in their intent. This wasn't a suggestion or an invitation. It was a demand, an imperative that matched the urgency coursing through her veins. Daniel's eyes darkened further, if that was even possible, his grip on her tightening with renewed purpose. Something flashed across his features: hunger, possession, determination, a primal response to her directness. And without a word, he stood up, effortlessly lifting her with him. His strength was surprising and immediately arousing. The way he supported her weight as if it were nothing. The solid muscles of his arms and chest flexing beneath his clothing as he adjusted his grip. Kristin gasped softly, instinctively wrapping her legs around his waist to secure herself. The new position pressed them even more intimately together, leaving no doubt about his physical response to her. Her arms wound around his neck, holding herself against him as he began moving with purposeful strides. "My place is closest," he murmured against her ear, his breath hot against her skin. 5 minutes. "Too long," she replied, deliberately shifting against him in a way that made his steps falter momentarily. A growl, there was no other word for it, rumbled from his chest. "Keep that up, and we won't make it past the park entrance." The raw need in his voice sent another wave of heat through her. "Promises. Promises," she teased, though her breathless tone betrayed her own desperation. Daniel carried her into the night, past the scattered pools of lamplight, towards somewhere they could finally stop holding back. Each step brought them closer to the inevitable conclusion of what had begun months ago with a simple business meeting and a fateful fantasy football bet. Neither of them was thinking about who had won the wager anymore. They had both claimed a far more significant prize. Daniel barely made it to his car before Kristin grabbed him again, her fingers curling into the front of his shirt as she pulled him close. The fabric bunched in her grasp, her knuckles pressing against the solid warmth of his chest beneath. They'd made it through the park at a pace that bordered on indecent, his arms supporting her weight with impressive strength until they reached the parking lot. The moment her feet touched the ground, she was on him again, unable to bear even seconds of separation. The streetlights cast harsh shadows across his features, highlighting the tension in his jaw, the hunger in his eyes, the slight part of his lips as he caught his breath. Her lips crashed against his in a kiss that was wild, desperate, consuming, like she had been waiting too damn long for this. And she had been. Months of verbal sparring, of lingering glances, of deliberate touches that never quite crossed the line. All of it had built to this moment of release, this abandonment of pretense and restraint. Daniel groaned against her mouth, the sound vibrating through both their bodies as his hands moved restlessly over her, gripping her hips, her waist, her back, as if trying to memorize every inch of her through touch alone. His fingers dug into the leather of her jacket, slid beneath the hem of her crop top to find bare skin, traced the curve of her spine with possessive intent. "Jesus Christ, Kristin," he muttered against her mouth, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. "You're going to be the death of me." The cool metal of his car pressed against her back as he crowded her against it, his body a wall of heat and solid muscle before her. The contrast of temperatures, cold at her back, burning heat at her front, only heightened every sensation, making her hyper-aware of each point of contact between them. Kristin broke away just enough to whisper, her breath hot against his lips, words emerging in a voice she barely recognized as her own. Low, husky, dripping with raw need. "I need you. Now. Now." The simple declaration hung between them, unambiguous in its meaning, direct in its intent. No games, no clever wordplay, no strategic banter, just honest, urgent desire that wouldn't be denied any longer. Daniel cursed under his breath, the expletive sharp and heartfelt as his forehead pressed against hers. She could almost see his restraint hanging by a thread. The careful control he prided himself on fraying rapidly beneath her touch. "Not here," he managed, glancing around the dimly lit parking lot. "Not like this." "Your place is too far," she countered, fingers already working at his belt. "I'm done waiting." She didn't give him time to think, to reconsider, to remember that they were still technically in a public space, albeit a deserted one at this hour. With one tug, she pulled him toward the back seat of his car, her free hand finding the door handle and yanking it open with urgent purpose. Daniel barely had time to register her intention before she was pushing him inside, the leather seats creaking beneath his weight as he landed with a soft grunt. The luxury sedan offered more space than most cars, but it was still a confined area. Intimate, private, immediate. "Kristin," he began, a token protest that died the moment she followed him into the back seat, closing the door behind her with a decisive thud that sealed them into their private world. Daniel barely had time to settle before Kristin was on him again, straddling his lap like she had on the park bench, her knees sinking into the plush leather on either side of his thighs. Her hands were everywhere, tangling in his hair, sliding down his chest, slipping beneath the hem of his shirt to find warm skin, claiming him with each touch. "I thought I was supposed to be the impatient one," he murmured against her throat, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin just below her ear, making her shiver despite the heat building between them. "You've clearly been a bad influence," she replied, gasping as his mouth found a particularly sensitive spot. "Consider this your comeuppance." Their kisses turned hotter, deeper, each one fueling the fire that had been simmering between them for months. The confined space of the car amplified everything, the sounds of their ragged breathing, the rustle of clothing as they struggled to touch more of each other, the faint fog beginning to form on the windows from their shared heat. Kristin rocked her hips against him, a deliberate movement that tore a low groan from deep in his chest. She swallowed the sound, capturing it with her mouth as his hands gripped her thighs, her waist pulling her closer, harder against him. "Do you have any idea?" Daniel murmured between kisses, his voice strained with desire. "How many times I've thought about this? About you?" "Tell me," she challenged, grinding down against him again, reveling in the way his breath hitched, in the way his fingers tightened almost painfully on her hips. "That first meeting," he began, his words punctuated by increasingly urgent kisses, "when you walked in wearing that skirt suit. Couldn't focus on a damn word of the presentation." Kristin smirked against his mouth, satisfaction blooming alongside desire. "I noticed," she admitted. "That's why I wore it again the following week." God, she loved the way he touched her, hungry, reverent, completely consumed by her. His hands moved with a delicious contradiction, confident enough to make her feel utterly desired, reverent enough to make her feel uniquely precious. Each stroke, each squeeze, each exploring caress seemed designed to drive her to the edge of sanity. "Evil woman," he accused with no real heat, his hands sliding beneath her top to trace the curve of her waist, thumbs brushing tantalizing patterns just below her bra. "Tormenting me on purpose." "You deserved it," she replied, arching into his touch, wanting more, needing more. "The way you looked at me, like you were undressing me with your eyes." "I was," he admitted, without a hint of shame, his grin wolfish in the dim light. "Still am. Though it seems to be becoming a reality rather than fantasy." His hands moved higher, skimming the undersides of her breasts, the touch both question and invitation. In response, Kristin reached down and pulled her top off in one fluid motion, tossing it aside with complete disregard for where it landed. Daniel froze, his eyes darkening as they roamed over her newly exposed skin, taking in the sight of her in a delicate white lace bra that left little to the imagination. Christ, he breathed, reverence and desire mingling in that single word.